side. This is how math works. We have these 5 areas. So these are just it's kind of hard to see, but in a nutshell, these are how these 5 math pillars are incorporated. These are just some examples: conceptual understanding, reasoning and problem solving, mathematical models and representations, math communication, and key math skills. So we try to, again, make it more engaging and to hit on those 5 key concepts. To kind of back it up, just for a review, the Exact Path program starts first and foremost by determining that starting point. So they take the assessment, they take their time, they finished it. At the very end, they're prescribed a learning path, and that happens each time they take the diagnostic. You want to accelerate the instruction through the content. The learning path is essentially their direct instruction. They're being presented with their lessons, they're being presented with practice, and they're being presented with an assessment, which is a progress check. So that's really where that remediation comes in place, or acceleration for students who are doing well. Then the biggest part, which is again the focus of today, is going to be that progress monitoring. So that third part is the program can do a lot, it can give them the direct instruction, it can provide them refreshers, it can do all that, but nothing replaces a teacher, meaning there's some areas where they're going to keep failing, no matter how it's presented to them. And they need somebody else to step in and see, hey, they've failed it. I need to go in and pull it. Amy, so a new learning path is created each time they take a diagnostic. Yes, it's not a completely new learning path, but it is adjusted based on their responses. Great question. In addition to that, they have their scaffolded supports. So for those kids who need it, there are some we call guided notes that are in some of those lessons that they can pull, their PDFs that they can fill in or print out for themselves. So that's another support that's in there. And then the other piece is looking at the growth. So when they take several diagnostics throughout the year, that you look at the first score, you have them working in the learning path, they're working on their own, you're intervening, you're progress monitoring, and then you get to the next diagnostic, and then you could see, did they grow? Did they have a higher scale score than they did last time? Or, is it kind of leveling off? Do we need additional intervention? That's really the most important piece in Exact Path. So again, Exact Path has reading, language arts, and math. Those are the 3 subject areas that are covered, and it really spans the K-12 trajectory. And then we have the diagnostic, the actual instruction, the progress monitoring and intervention as necessary, and then the analysis that we talked about. Now down here, these pictures might be familiar to you. We're going to see these a couple times throughout today. This is just kind of a preview. The middle area is an example of the student class diagnostic results. So you might be familiar with this. After you've given a diagnostic, you go into your subject area, you find your diagnostic results, and you can see for each. And the left side is what we call the knowledge map, and that's a big area for progress monitoring. This is really where you're going to be looking at areas or skills that students have passed. You're going to be looking at what they're currently doing, areas they failed. All of these different icons that are on here correspond to a key that tells you what the student is doing. And then on the right here, this is an example of what a 3rd through 5th grade student would see when they're in the platform. And we're going to see some other examples of what students would see as well, but that's what they would see in their learning path. So we're going to jump into the diagnostic assessment so that you have a bit more familiarity with how it's structured, how it works, and then how to best really understand the results as you monitor those students. This is an example of a reading diagnostic. All right, and kind of up here on the left, you're going to see this again here in a minute. It's going to be a little bit bigger. Student takes their diagnostic at the beginning of the year and whatever point that you have your diagnostic window scheduled, or when they first come into the school. It's structured just like a state standardized test. They have passages, they have questions answered. If you enable click to speak or slide narration or read aloud, that's going to be there for them. There's highlighters, very similar to the testing format. Students will start the test at the grade level they are in the platform. So whatever they are assigned, if they are a 6th grade student, they're going to start with 6th grade questions. If they're a 3rd grade student, it'll be 3rd grade questions, so on and so forth. That can be changed if you are familiar with your student and it's before the next testing window. One of these areas that I'll show you is in your class managed classes area, there's a student settings. And if you have a student who needs a read aloud accommodation, or if you're feeling like, they're a sixth grade student, but they're not going to be performing at this, and I'd rather just start them lower, you could do that. But for the sake of argument, by default, it's the grade level. It is adaptive, so if they get questions right, they get a more difficult question. If they get them wrong, they get a easier question. So that's just kind of how the questions are answered. This is an example of an individual report here in the middle. So this is a student report that if you went into your class reports and then you went by individual student, you're going to see something that looks like this. This is a language arts example. So over here, you can see the total number of questions the students had was 27. The average, or I should say the range, is around 30 to 60 questions. So 30 to 60 questions is what they're going to see. A lot of times we'll get questions like, how many questions do they have, or something. It just varies because it's adaptive. Over here, you'll see the total time that they've spent, and then you'll see all the questions. Now, you cannot see the actual questions that are being asked, but you can see the domain. You can see the total time they spent on each question, the answer, if it's right or wrong, and then the skill grade level of that question. You can also see that the student took it in 2 sessions. The diagnostic does not have to be finished at once. It doesn't, some students get extended time or whatever the case may be. It can be taken in multiple settings. Not recommended. You usually want to get it done in one if you can, but that option is there. You'll also notice when you're looking at the data for your diagnostics, you'll see these bars here. This is what's known as the confidence interval. I call them the bars because it's pretty layman's terms. As you start the test, or as the student starts the test, you can see these bars are a little wider. As the test progresses, you can see they shrink. So we get to the end here and they're pretty tight. That's what you want to see because it's basically an indication that, hey, ExactPath is determining the student is doing well here, they're not doing well here, and kind of pinpointing where they need to be. If you see that the bars are a lot wider and they kind of stay that way, that's kind of an FYI to you to say, maybe I should have them retake it, or kind of review how they did, just to see what my next step would be. But in most cases, you're going to get a notification on your home screen that's going to say recommended review diagnostic, which is going to say, hey, Billy has sped through the diagnostic in 10 minutes, probably not an accurate result. So this is what you'll see from the individual student. Then, when you've given the second diagnostic and third and all those, you can start to see growth. So for example, this is a class diagnostic result. I believe this is for math. And you can see, it's really hard to see, but we'll see it a couple of times. You'll see the scale score, which is the score that we give in diagnostics. It's from 500 to 1500 is the range. And you'll see that for the class. You'll see the highest student. You'll see the lowest student. You'll also see after the first diagnostic, or actually it's after you've taken the second diagnostic, you'll see a growth measure. So this number 42, and there's a number up here 16. This is the average growth in points between diagnostics. So this is really one of the measures to see, hey, is the intervention working? Are they spending enough time in the learning path? Do I have to pull them in small groups more? Do I have to have more individualized one-on-one with somebody? However that works, that's what you'll see here. So here, this is an example that was kind of up the upper left-hand corner, but it was kind of hard to see, kind of blew it up here. This is an example of the reading diagnostic assessment. Again, you have your tools up here, click to speak if they need it. They can increase the text size, decrease it. They have the highlighter tool, all those kind of things. They can save and exit again. They don't have to take it all in one sitting. So the idea is they take the assessment, they take their time, and then they get prescribed a learning path. So you want it to assess their strengths and needs, and then based on the needs, give them the learning path. It ends with, again, a scale score. That's the name that you'll hear a couple times. That's the number that they're going to receive on the diagnostic. It can be as low as 500, as high as 1500. Again, I covered this earlier, but just for the sake of argument, again, they started their grade level for the assessment unless you've changed it. Easier, they get it wrong, they get easier questions, they get it right, they get more difficult questions. You want the confidence interval to shrink as time goes on. And then at the very end, we get that learning path. So that's, again, it's adaptive. Students are going to get different questions. The range of questions will will vary as well. As you prepare for future assessments over the course of the year, just a couple things to keep in mind. One, you want to make sure your class is already created, so you have a class, because you can't view the data without that. You might be on auto schedule. I think you might be on auto schedule. I'm not off the top of my head, so you might not have to do that. But in preparing students for the assessment, I guess I can't stress enough the importance of front loading them to make sure that they know the importance of the assessment. One of the issues that happens a lot in cyber schools is, you could probably guess, parents helping out their student at home, where it's, obviously it's going to skew the results. So kind of setting the tone early with families to say, hey, please don't assist. They're going to struggle. One of the biggest pieces, and it's down here on the left, that anybody who's working with students should always know, explain that, hey, a lot of the questions are going to be tough. They're not going to get it. They're not expected to get every question. Some students are perfectionists. Some just get really stressed after they've gotten questions wrong. So stressing that, hey, you're not going to know it all. Do what you can, and it'll work out in the end there. So obviously setting up the environment for them with distractions, communicating the importance of the test, and then allowing for sufficient time. Just for your information, these are some of the approximate testing times when you're given the diagnostic assessment based on grade level. High school assessments are very similar to the 3-8, just a bit more time, but here's the kind of the overview. If you're proctoring it, maybe you proctor it virtually, maybe you have them take it on your own. It's however you do it, allotting some time for directions, level setting, tone setting, making sure they understand here's what's going to happen, like just what I told you before. For K2, the assessment itself for each should take about 10 to 20 minutes. Obviously, they're younger kids. The setting for a full assessment is not going to be, appropriate for any longer than that. So allotting between 15 and 25 minutes from giving the directions to proctoring the assessment to the end of it for those. For grades 3 through 8, it's going to be a lot more rigorous. So again, setting those expectations for the directions, but then the assessment's going to be between 30 and 45 minutes for those kind of intermediate middle grades. As you get into the high school, you'll get a lot closer to 45 minutes to an hour. That's just basically the most often what you're going to see, that 45-minute to an hour time frame. So just making sure that students understand that, and that you can kind of monitor what their total time is going to be to see if they put as much effort as they need to in that. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. Do we have any questions about the diagnostic assessment, how it works, or really anything concerning the diagnostic before we go on to the learning path? All right. So the second half, and really what the focus is going to be here again, is going to be the progress monitoring, and most of that is going to take place in the learning path itself. So when we talk about the learning path, it's what comes at the very end of the diagnostic. These are two examples of what students would see depending on their grade level. The one on the left is going to be the older students, so 6th through 12th grade students are going to see an interface that looks like this. They'll have one that says math learning path, one that says reading learning path, one that says reading, language arts learning path. Same thing will happen for diagnostic. So when they first take the diagnostic or the window is open, they're going to see math diagnostic, reading diagnostic, so on and so forth. Over here on the right is an example of the 3rd through 5th grade learning path. So it's kind of got this air balloon theme. And then there's one for the younger kids too that's kind of underwater, but these are just some things in here. You'll notice here too, for the one on the left, you'll see the math learning path. You can see what they're currently working on. They can see it, their lesson, the number of trophies or skills they've passed, which they can also see up here in My Rewards. You'll also see this other activity. Linear expressions with rational coefficients is what's known as a priority skill assignment. Exact path I mentioned a couple of times is 2 parts. You get your diagnostic and get your learning path. However, sometimes as a teacher, you're teaching something that's not in the learning path at the moment. So I was a 4th grade teacher. They might be working on adverbs or something, and or main ideas, and I'm focusing on theme. One of the things that you can do is assign them specific topics that either they're working on in class in addition to what the learning path is, or as a type of intervention. So maybe there's something else that you're noticing they're failing, or something that they're not doing very well in. you can assign an additional activity or material in addition to the learning path as well. So that's through an area that's called Assess and Teach. So if you're familiar with ExactPath and you've kind of played around in the interface, you'll see an area that's called Assess and Teach. That's where you can pull some additional skill assignments from. Getting back to the actual learning path and how that operates. Starts with a lesson. One skill at a time per subject, so one in math, one in reading, one in language arts. They all start with the lesson itself, so that's the direct instruction. In this case, it's a lesson on context clues. So it's an animated tutorial, it introduces the concept, so sometimes there's videos, and it just says, here's the skill, here's how it's going to work. Then we morph into the practice. Sometimes the practice is embedded in the lesson itself, other times it's a separate activity. So the practice is going to be them obviously practicing that skill. There's a feedback that they're going to get, whether they're right or wrong, and it's really not score. I will say this, because we're focused on the progress monitoring piece, one of the things you're going to see on your teacher homepage might be an icon, and maybe you've seen it before, is it's an orange icon with an exclamation point, and it says struggling. That means that the student has done the lesson, they're currently in practice, and they're not doing well in practice. So the struggling is basically before you get to the third step, which is this progress check. So if you notice you have that orange exclamation point, that's information to you that, hey, they've taken a lesson, they're practicing it, and it's not going very well, and you might need to intervene before they get to the actual assessment progress check. After that practice has happened, the assessment is there. So the third part of the three-part learning path is the progress check. They're short 5-question quizzes. They're all computer scored that assess that skill. So if they pass that progress check, which is a 4 or a 5 out of 5 or 80% or higher, they get a trophy, they pass the skill, all is great, and you move on to the next piece. If not, we go into some remediation, which I'm going to talk about shortly. So mastery in ExactPath to earn the trophy is determined by one thing, and that is the progress check. They can do great on the lesson, they can knock it out of the park for the practice, then they get to the progress check and fail it. That is where the money is made, in the progress check. So it's assessed one skill at a time. If they don't pass that progress check in that main skill, they're going to get what's called a building block. So if you're familiar with ExactPath in the past, you may have seen a little icon that's got 3 white blocks, and it's in like a red block, and it's called a building block. That's essentially a prerequisite skill to that main skill that's going to help them understand the larger skill at hand. And we're going to talk about this here as well. So in a nutshell, ExactPath can either accelerate learning, so they're passing their progress checks, they get a trophy, they're moving on step by step, or it can remediate, meaning it's going to give you an alternate version of the assignment. It's going to give that building block opportunity and things like that. When they do master it and they master that skill, they're going to get a trophy. They also have challenges. They're another item that you can use in ExactPath to kind of encourage use in the platform, encourage passing skills. But those are some incentives that they can get. But getting back to the learning path and how it works, I always like to kind of dive deep into this so that you can understand it better, so that if students ask questions or they say, I already did this, then you can understand why they're getting it. So following the diagnostic, they start in the learning path. One skill at a time per subject. Lesson, practice, progress check, like we said before. The easiest thing to understand is they get a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5. They master it. They get the little green trophy in that knowledge map. They get the trophies on their page. All is well with the world. That doesn't always happen. They will fail it because they either speed through it or they genuinely don't know the topic. If that's the case, they get a second chance at learning with the same skill. So you're retaking that original skill module, the same lesson, the same practice, same progress check. So this is what will happen if they fail it. So if they say, I already did this, it's because they failed it the first time and they're on it the second time. However, even on the redo, sometimes they're not doing very well. That's when they're going to get a building block. You will see this as you are progress monitoring, as you are in the knowledge map, or even the current activities is another area you might be familiar with, or even on your homepage. You'll see this blue square with the 1 in the semicircle with the arrow. That means that they're retaking it. So they've taken it once, this is their retake. So just something to keep in mind as you're monitoring it. If they're not successful, that's where the building block comes in. So they started with the original skill, they're redoing it, and they're in a building block. I always use theme as an example, just because I'm used to it. So let's just imagine their first skill in reading is theme. What is theme? They're going to do practice on it. They're going to do a progress check. Let's say they fail the first theme skill. They're going to retake that same thing all over again. If they fail it again, that's where the building block comes in. This is a prerequisite skill that helps understand theme. So for example, with theme, most often you need to know how to make inferences. You can't really identify a theme of a work if you can't make inferences to really the plot or characters. So this prerequisite skill could be inferencing that helps them understand theme better. Or there's an alternate version of theme, but most often it's going to be a prerequisite skill, especially in the younger grades. If they get that prereq correct, which you're going to see this building block on the knowledge map, current activities in your homepage, you're going to see what they're working on. So you can see that they've basically, anytime they see this, they have taken it once, they've failed it, they've taken it again, they failed it, and they're on a prereq. So obviously intervention might be necessary. If they get it right and they're good with inferencing, they move back to the original skill. So they pass the building block inferencing lesson practice progress check. Now they're on theme again. And then they go on, to do that again. However, there are times where the student is not going to be successful on the building block. They're going to take the first skill, they're going to fail it. They're going to do a redo, they're going to fail it. They're going to get the building block, they're going to fail it. If they fail that building block, there might be an alternate version of it. So for example, in this case, inferencing, there might be an alternate inferencing lesson or a prereq to that. So for example, if it's inferencing, you should probably know how to make key ideas and details. You got to point out key ideas and details before you can make an inference. So that would be a second building block that's a prerequisite skill to that prerequisite skill. So that's kind of how that trajectory works. And then the same thing, if there isn't a prereq to that, it's going to be an alternate version of it, and then it's going to move them back again. So from key ideas to inferencing to the actual main theme. But the most important thing to keep in mind, you have probably seen these red X's before as you have watched your students work or you've progress monitored and you see the X's. This means that the skill has not been mastered. They have done the original skill, they've done some prereqs, things are not going well, they've tried and tried and tried. The system is given this one and this one and this, and it's not doing it. Either because they're speeding through it, not taking their time, or again, they generally don't know it and they're having difficulty understanding it. If that's the case, the student will move forward to the next skill regardless. So no more than 2 attempts at skill remediation are allowed before a student can proceed. This is why it's so important on your homepage, which is new that I'll be talking about, that the teacher notifications that are on the dashboard that show struggling, that show failed, that show all those things are so important to watch for so that you don't get to this stage. Or even when you do get to this stage, you can make interventions post-it. So just to hammer in the importance, why not put a bigger slide of it on here? So again, when you see these big X's, that just means they've taken the skill, they've tried it a couple of times, it just hasn't been mastered. So again, no more than 2 attempts at skill remediation. So if they failed the theme lesson and they've done all these kind of prereqs, that might move them on to plot or something else, just so that they can kind of keep moving in their learning. One of the things that's really important to do for students is to, well, younger students, they love rewards. Actually, I think every student loves rewards, regardless of their age. One of the things that can help them keep encouraged is through the use of what's called challenges. So if you're in your platform, you might be able to see it if you're familiar with it. There's an area called challenges. This is where you can make one of 2 challenges. You can make one based on time and system. Maybe you want the student to work a bit more in their learning path than they have been. So you could set a time goal for maybe a couple days, a couple weeks, a month, that they reach that goal, they get a badge and a certificate, and maybe some other party. Maybe you throw a virtual movie day or something like that for kids who've met that criteria. The other way you could do it is by skill. So you can set a certain number of skills to be passed before they get the badge or the certificate. So those are some things. You get to choose the badge and you can do all those kind of things. But one of the newest features that was updated this summer is the teacher dashboard. In the past, on your teacher dashboard, you saw some notifications, but you couldn't really do anything with it. Just kind of showed you, here's what it is. Now, you are able to intervene right then and there with what students are doing. So this is an example of what a teacher would see on their side of ExactPath when students have started working in the diagnostic and working in the learning path. So a couple things to highlight here. There are 3 categories. One is needs attention. That's your most drastic students that you really need to pinpoint. May need support. So these are students who've kind of been good in some areas, not so good in other areas, and then deserves recognition. So some areas to give student shout outs, hey, you've been doing great, because we always want to award those students too, not just the ones who are struggling. You'll notice a couple things that stand out here. One, you see this red box that says recommended review. This pops up if a student has a diagnostic that is likely not accurate. So that means the student has sped through it, or they've just clicked and it's guessing, which means, your learning path's not going to be very good. If you see one that says recommended review, you're going to see a blue hyperlink here. You're going to see the time they spent on task, the date they took it, and if you want to dismiss the notification after you've done it. By clicking on any of these blue hyperlinks, it's going to take you to something else. So in this case, it's going to take you to where you could reset it for them and have them take it again. So telling Eric, hey, you look like you were clicking through. I need you to really put the time into it so we can give you an accurate path and go that way and do it that way. The other areas here you're going to see are the actual learning path. So I mentioned before the orange box that says struggling. This is for their practice. So if you look at each of these, you can see it corresponds to practice, prime the engines, practice blending blocks, practice barnacle box. Try to say barnacle box 20 times fast. It's too early for that. So with the practices, this is where they've taken the lesson, they're in the practice, but they have not gotten a progress check yet. This is an area where you want to intervene early to say, hey, Nicholas, looks like you're struggling with identifying numbers as prime or composite. I might not frame it like that, but looks like you're having trouble on this lesson. By clicking on the blue hyperlink, it's going to link you to additional videos, activities, worksheets, lesson plans, things that can help teach that skill. So those are some interventions that you can make right then and there without, within the platform. You'll also see some areas like skill missed and not mastered. Not mastered is that X that comes in place. So they've taken the skill a couple times. The remediation hasn't really done very much. So from there, you click on progress check and it's going to bring you the same things. You could see their progress check, what they did. You could even have a virtual session and walk them through the questions on the progress check. There are no answer keys. I will tell you that for the progress check. That's just one thing I always put out there. But you have the opportunity to intervene by clicking and assigning them additional topics, which I'll show you today. All right. So any questions on the learning path before we kind of flip it to go into the actual platform and to give you some examples within it themselves? And while you're doing that, these are just some environments that each student will see as they work through the learning path. There's your K2. I think that might be the first time I showed you that. All right. So I'm going to hop over here to a demo account, and I'm going to go in as a teacher. So again, if you have double monitors or you're one who likes to see both things, that's up to you. If not, you can just follow along like this. This is the teacher side of things. So if you've been in ExactPath before, you've kind of walked around, then you probably are familiar with this. This is where those teacher notifications would appear. Now, this is a demo account, so I don't have students really working in it recently. So You're not going to see anything but that same screen you're going to see over here. If you work with multiple classes, you can toggle between classes. You could focus on one specific subject, and you can also see a time period. It defaults to the previous week, but you can also see this week and last or the last 30 days if you're looking for notifications. Couple things to keep in mind. One thing I brought up before is we have challenges. So we have these challenges over here, which is essentially if you want to reward students by spending a certain amount of time in the program or skills. For example, here's one that's a Master Those Skills challenge that has a time frame of 6 years. I probably wouldn't recommend that you set a time frame of 6 years for it. Might be more applicable for a month. I would hope in 6 years you'd get 6 trophies. But this is an example of here's the number of trophies, here's what students have met it, and then you can print a certificate there. So if you have some students you're really trying to focus on and encourage them to get these trophies and encourage them to, really fill those gaps more, you can create a challenge. But what I want to do is go into manage classes here for a minute. This is where you obviously can create a class, you can add teachers to your class, you add students, take students away, all those kind of things. But one of the areas that doesn't always get looked at is right here in the student settings. This is something where you can adjust for the diagnostic as well as the learning path. Some of you may work with older students in 6th through 12th grade. I'm assuming this call we have a mixture of ones who are elementary, middle, high school, those kind of things. Oftentimes with high school kids, you might have students who are high school or late middle high school who are on IEPs who might benefit from a presentation that's more elementary. So for example, over here, you're going to see where it says for grade 6-12 only, adjust content style, and then a little icon. I like to bring this to the attention of those who work with the older kids, because in general, when you're working with older kids, their lessons are going to be a little bit more basic. I mean, they're not going to be as, cartoony. But if you have students who would benefit from that more, or that they would find it more engaging, it'll turn into this if you click these on. Now, this is a K2 class, so it's not going to let me. But if I went into like an older class, like this one here, I can click, and it can allow these students to be presented with material that's a bit more cartoony. It's not going to adjust the content as much, but it's going to adjust the presentation of it. So that's just something to keep in mind if you have students who would benefit from that in grade 6-12. I also mentioned the diagnostics. If you know of students going into the next diagnostic who are not at the grade level that they are in the system, so they're a 7th grade student and they're not that level, this is where you can adjust the starting point for the diagnostic in any of the subjects. So for example, Janier here, 8th grade, I know from what they've been working on this year, from their learning path, from everything I've monitored, they're not at an 8th grade level. And the next time it goes around, I think they should start at maybe a 6th grade level. It's going to be a bit more appropriate. And I might do that for each grade, depending on what their data shows. If they need a text-to-speech, I can toggle it on for that. For math, I should say. The other ones are on by default. So I'll turn on Save Changes. And now for the next diagnostic, the student is going to start at the 6th grade level. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're monitoring progress and you're setting up students for their next diagnostic, just to keep that in mind. All right, so now the progress monitoring piece. Anytime you need to get home, just click Admin. Not get in your car, but click Admin. So to progress monitor, you have a couple things. One is going to be that homepage that I showed you the example of before, where you can click into the activities, you can see who's struggling to do that. But the other portions that you're probably more familiar with are going to be found in the content itself. So math, reading, and language arts. I'm going to start here with math. When you're monitoring students, you're going to be in really one of two primary areas. There's going to be a current activities, and there's going to be the knowledge map. I like to think of the knowledge map as a bird's eye view. It's going to show you everything along K-12. Current activities is more a focused, zoomed in area. So I'm going to start with the knowledge map. This is an area you're probably familiar with. You can toggle between classes if you have multiple. You're in math, but you can break it down by specific domains if you like. Maybe we're focused on geometry, so I can go into geometry. When I go down here, for geometry, I can see all of my students and what they're working on their learning path. I'm going to give you it all so you can see a bit more, and then I'm going to zoom out a bit so you can see a bit more of this. Okay. So here's an example of a knowledge map for my younger students in K2. Works the same way for whatever grade. I have all of my students over here on the left. If I click into them, it brings me to their profile. So it's going to give me their diagnostic results, more detail about their learning path, all that kind of stuff. But for the sake of argument, we're going to focus on here. You can see some examples of students like Amna here. She's gotten trophies in a lot of areas, right? She's doing pretty well. This blue square, she's currently practicing. So she's working on it right now. She's probably going through the lesson and practice, but that's just something to keep an eye on. Down here, I see that she failed something because this is a building block. So she's done well, but here, read numbers to 120 is the skill, first grade skill, read numbers to 120. She's on a building block. If I click on that building block, I get this drawer that pops up that gives me additional information. So I can see when they took the lesson, they took it one time. In the practice, they scored a 58. So not ideal for practice. I want to focus on the progress check. I go down to progress check. She got a 1 out of 5. Not very good. Not the 4 or 5 out of 5 you need. So I can do a couple of different things. One thing is, if I have the time, depending on how you're structured, if you want to do like a one-on-one session, maybe you have a virtual session or something like that. If I pull up review skill, I can see her progress check. Again, this is her first attempt. This is the skill. This is the date and time, and this is the result. Again, we don't have the answer key, so you can't pull up an answer key and walk it through it, but you can pull this up and walk them through it yourself. So pick the number that means 45. She picked this one, going in and explaining, hey, this is 4 or 5, all this kind of stuff. So that's one thing you could do, is pull up the progress check and go through it with her. The other item is under resources. Resources are going to be a number of things that you could either push to them, to assign to them in the system, if it's another lesson or practice or something like that, or even a video, or things that can be printed or even digitized if you want to send like a PDF version of it. You have a worksheet. So for example, Barnacle Box. Maybe I pull this up and we work on it together, or I do it as a PDF because you can fill it out here, and I send it to them and they answer here or there. They do have answer keys for the actual worksheets. So you have those, which are cool. So if that's something you also want to do in your resources to kind of go the extra step to really make sure that Amna understands reading numbers to 120, that's something you can do. You can also see the standards that are covered on that particular skill as well. And the learning path, you can preview the lesson as the student would. So, for example, if I click on preview for lesson, this is what the student sees. This is what they go through. So this is an area that maybe I do it with them for them to understand it better. Maybe we go through it together, or that I could just preview myself to kind of understand the lesson better and where they might be having trouble. So that's another area that you can go to. The bar down here goes through the entirety again of K-12. So you can kind of see there's nobody working up here yet, but you can see some areas. You can also see the retakes. So remember from earlier, we talked about, hey, they failed the lesson 1 the first time, so they're on a retake, and it works the same way. You highlight it here, and you can see each. This is struggling, meaning they're in practice. They're not doing very well in the practice. They got a 60%. They haven't gotten to progress check yet. So when you see the orange icon, they haven't gotten to that assessment, but they are struggling in practice. So again, you could do the same thing. You pull up the practice to them. You do it one-on-one, walk them through it before they get to the progress check. The most important thing, if you can, is to catch these exclamation points before anything else. If you can catch the exclamation points and intervene before they get to the progress check, the result is usually a heck of a lot better. If that doesn't happen because maybe you missed it, maybe there's not enough time, maybe you have other students who are priorities, then you go into where you see the building blocks and kind of attacking it there. And then the other last line of defense is if you have students who, let me see if I can pull up a couple more, who actually have failed the lesson. So that's where you're going to see some, I don't think I have anybody who's really failing. But you'll see ones that have the not mastered, and it's going to be another example of, another way to intervene. The other item too, I'm going to go back to math. We looked at knowledge map would be the current activities. Current activities is more that zoomed in view. So the map gives you kind of the big picture. This is what they're working on, everybody at one given time. So for example, this is that same class. These are all those same students. There's Amna again. She's currently working on counting objects to 20. That was the one that was kind of before that. You can click on any one of these and it gives you the same drop-down menu that's got the preview the lesson, that's got the progress check, that's got previous attempts at the practice. Some of them have a mastery quiz as part of the practice, the standards, and then additional resources. The students on their first retake. This is an example of a lesson that has something I can assign to them. So I can assign them this practice. I can assign them this lesson and practice. This has a number of worksheets. This also has some lesson ideas. So those are some just different ways that you can monitor what they're doing and then intervene from there. So a couple retakes, some are practicing. Practicing isn't really an alert. That's usually pretty good. It means they haven't done anything bad yet. It just kind of means they're in the lesson, kind of going through it. But then again, struggling in the practice, and then you can see what they did before, and then what's going to come next. So after they've done with this skill, this is what's going to come next in the trajectory. So those are some other areas to look at. I had also mentioned when you go into the learning path that you can preview or get more of a detailed description of the student. So here's this Amna. I'm going to go ahead and click this blue hyperlink. So this is something that you can do really in here or the knowledge map. So I'm going to go into Amna's profile. This pulls up her math and her entire skill progression that she's passed in the learning path. So for example, here are all the skills here. So there's the domains, counting and cardinality, algebra and expressions, numbers and operations. I have all of these skills, the grade level of that skill, the learning path they're on. So maybe learning path 1, learning path 2, the progress check, when they took it, and then their score. So this is just a way to see all their trophies, all the skills passed. If you go over to skills, you can see each of their learning paths. So here's learning path 1. That's the first one they were on, that they took the diagnostic on, and then they went to the second learning path. One of the things that can be done, if you find that they are really, really struggling with the learning path, you see a lot of fails, you see a lot of struggling, a lot of that's on the knowledge map, and you're like, man, the student needs more intervention than I could probably give. If that's the case, when you go into that student's profile and you go to skills, you're going to see this here, edit learning path placement. This is going to allow you to change the learning path to either increase it for the student or in that case, decrease it. So maybe bringing it down a grade level or so. So this is kindergarten, so you're really not going to be adjusting to anything before that. But if this were like 3rd or 4th or 5th or whatever, I could change from their default to another grade level to go a little bit behind. So that's just one of those other things that you can do if you find that students are really struggling and you're like, hey, we got to adjust this learning path because they are failing everything. You can go into here and get it that way. So again, just so you kind of understand how I got there, I was in the learning paths, either current activities or knowledge map. I find the student. When I click on the student, that's what's going to bring up the trophies. And then I'm going to go actually to skills. And then that's where I can change the learning path placement. You could print all these items out as well. So if you needed information on that, you can print those out. The other item that would be beneficial to you is, again, additional intervention when you're progress monitoring, and that is through here, the assess and teach. If you remember a little bit earlier, I showed you an example of a 6 through 12 student in the PowerPoint, where you saw the reading learning or math learning path, I think it was, and then a priority skill assignment. That's where these are coming from. So these priority skill lessons, if there's something you're teaching or the student would benefit from, or something that you want them to be assigned additionally, you can find it here. So you can search by the subject. I can search by math. Let's go 2nd grade, geometry, and let's just do describe shapes. I go click go. And here are some resources for those that I could assign to an individual student. I could assign to a group of students, however I want to do it. I can preview it here, or I can go in here and say, assign it. Again, I can do the whole class or just a couple students. This is going to pop up another box on their home screen that's going to allow them to work through the additional assignment. When you've done that, if you choose to do that, in order to monitor the progress on the assignment, you're going to go to where it says assignments. So here you can see active assignments and then when it would be completed. So this is an example of one I set up. How many students have completed it? None so far. But if I break it out, here's Anna again. She hasn't started or completed yet, but when she does, I'll see the time on task, what their score was, and all those things too. So if you want to progress monitor individual assignments that are not part of the learning path, you would do that here under assignments. All right. So as we wrap up today, I'm going to provide you with some additional resources, and then I'll leave some time for questions. One of these things that I'm going to drop in the chat is one thing that I highly recommend you bookmark just to keep maybe a folder in your Google Chrome or something that you can refer back to as time goes on, as you become even better with ExactPath. This is the Getting Started page. There's a couple cool things on there. There's a live office hours that you can always sign up for with another live person. So if you wanted to get additional help individually, or if you wanted to as a group, you can sign up for an office hours and pop in there with questions. You have additional resources like an orientation, Getting Started page, information on the student interface in step 5. So maybe you want to preview student interfaces more so you can help them, especially since you're remote. Maybe it's a benefit to understand what the student side looks like a bit more. Things for families, so a parent introduction letter. This is a really cool thing, ExactPath Diagnostic Guide for Parents, to pass along to families to say, hey, you know, please have your student take their time, don't help on it, all those kind of things. And then this, which is, I'm going to actually put this in your chat as well, and it's the implementation guidance. This is the recommendation for when students are using ExactPath to get the most out of it, to grow the most, and to do the best on the PSSAs. We used to call it a dosage recommendation, but it was just changed to implementation guidance, but this is what it's considered. Ideally, for students, maybe not as much in the younger grades, but if you can, 40 minutes per week per subject working in the learning path is the goal. Now, is that always plausible? No. There are a lot of things, you know, distance learning and other curriculum you're using, all this kind of thing. But ideally, 40 minutes per week per subject in math, reading, and language arts to work in the learning path. In addition, passing 8+ skills in each category, so in each reading, language arts, and math over 12 weeks is what's going to see the most growth. So one recommendation for you, and I always suggest, is create a challenge for students that's 12 weeks out, put all your students in that challenge, and see who can reach 8 in math for those 12 weeks. That's what you want to see from those students. And then down here are some additional recommendations. So to grow students more than 1 grade, here's what you should do. To grow students more than 2 grades, here are some interventions necessary. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now and leave some time here, last couple minutes we have, for questions. Any questions about anything I covered today, anything in the diagnostic learning path, or any burning questions that you may have? Yes, you will be sent the recording as well. Great question. All
any
right,
questions? Just real quick, any questions from anybody? I know when we were together, there was a lot on like how you would go in and pull kiddos out and maybe provide additional intervention or specific lessons on data. Do we feel generally better about that? Do we want to review the recording maybe and see if there's additional questions that come up? Do we feel good with that? I know that was a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Assume silence is golden. We're going to keep rocking and rolling. Everybody feels better.
Hopefully we've gotten a lot more to the yellow greenish hue to kind of have a better idea of kind of how the learning path works, diagnostic, and some interventions. I will throw this too in the chat. This is just our feedback form. It'd be greatly appreciated if you took a minute to fill it out. Basically, it just says, did I outline the objectives for you? One question says, are you prepared to use the program? That does not mean that you have to be a master at it. It just means, do you feel a little bit better? Do you feel a bit more knowledgeable for that? And did I apply additional resources? Bailey, I see a question here. How are you going to do your goals? More growth-based than skill? Anthony, is that something that you'd want to answer more, or kind of depends on how you're
Yeah, I would say that uh just for my clarification there, are you talking about altering from like our traditional kind of like SMART goals, those kinds of things, and how it would still kind of look similar to how it always has, or how we started kind of pushing towards the end of last year, where you might be picking a sub-skill type of area. Maybe it's exactly what you were working on. Billy pulled up a lot of those examples for the math that I thought were super helpful. And you might pick one of those sub-skill domains and say, by typically we use that kind of not semester, what's the term? Quarter
Right.
long over that duration. Here's where, we'd like them to score, and then link it when that data gets in there as well. Will also provide you the opportunity for like a rate of improvement number. So then that data gets pulled in there, and then you'll be able to see the rate of improvement that's coming, and if they're meeting that rate of improvement or how that looks. Does that help? That's a good question.
Yeah. And then I see a couple others here. One says, how are we supposed to monitor letter recognition and letter sounds? So that's not something necessarily it's in a learning path. It's going to be, it might be earlier in the learning path for the younger kids. There is something too I can share you real quick so you kind of have an idea if you'd like to use it. This is for oral fluency task as well, and this is for a focus on K3. So if you're in the reading area and then you find oral fluency tasks, these are areas that you could either print or you can, assess virtually for those students, that you can kind of pull it up for them. You can browse the fluency tasks for each grade level, and you can kind of do it that way. If you're looking for more of the fluency for letter recognition, those are some lessons that are probably going to be found in the early elementary. But if there's something that you directly want to assess, then I'd probably recommend having your own piece for that. Yes, it's only up to grade 3 for the oral fluency tasks. This is brand new. They just added this year. It's K3 to monitor for fluency. A lot of big piece for this was because of a lot of dyslexia screeners. They wanted to have additional resources for helping to screen in there. So there aren't letter sounds in there. That could be a possibility. I'm not sure which grade you're looking at. I know one of the biggest pieces that they've added here in the younger grades for the science of reading and making sure that phonological awareness pieces in there for especially the letter sounds in there. So Pam, if you'd love to, if you have examples and you're like, hey, this isn't it, feel free to email me. It's billy.green@admenem.com. I can help you out identifying a bit more if you're interested in that. And then
Just to tag on a little bit, sorry, I just wanted to throw in there for like internal purposes. Remember, this is one piece or one option we're using, but you as interventionists have other tools that you're allowed to use. And if you are focusing on a sub skill like that you can't find in there, that's another one. Remember how you have that rotational block time, you can pull students and use other tools that maybe would allow for that. So if you're running into barriers, so it's not the only thing that you have to use is this.
And then I see another question. Is it possible to turn off the requirement of completing a learning path in practice prior to progress check? No. So the way it's designed is it wants to do that teaching the intervention piece. So there isn't a way to kind of skip to the progress check. It's going to be locked for the student, so they have to go through the lesson in practice before they can take it. Let's see what else. So we have, is the ROI based on the overall diagnostic or individual skill checks? So with your diagnostic is going to do the placement, and then from the diagnostic, if you go into the summary for the diagnostic, it's going to show you really the subdomains or the categories that students have done well on or that they've struggled on, and then it's going to give them the learning path that's going to remediate those skills. So really your goals are really skill specific on the individual progress checks. So one way to kind of monitor that would definitely be the knowledge map, so you can kind of see where they're falling on that.
I have a quick question, Billy, to piggyback off of that. So when they take the diagnostic and they have this skill, can they take the progress check more than one time? Like, are there multiple versions of the progress check? So let's say if we're targeting a certain skill, we can, or is it just one progress check?
It's one progress check and then they get the retake. So they take that first one, they take the progress check, they get this skill again, they take the retake, and then it's going to be the prerequisite. So there's only one progress check that they're going to get for each of those skills. You could assign additional material to them, like those ones in the resources if they have it available, but it's one progress check. and many of the progress checks have several questions, so it's not always going to be the same questions. Sometimes they have a bank. About how long does a lesson take in a practice session? Most of the time, and it really does vary, but from what I've kind of gotten, about 50 minutes generally is probably what it would be from the lessons, the practice, the progress check, kind of getting it completed. Just depends on the student. That's probably the average. If you're working at like one skill at a time and doing it that way, that would probably be the best recommendation. All right, any other questions that maybe I missed or that you can think of about exact math? All right. Well, thank you guys for attending today. Hopefully you found a couple new bits and tips and tricks that you can help as you're interviewing with your students. And, you know, if we need additional assistance, I'll be happy to lead another session. Anthony, you can just let me know, and we can always do a follow-up if you guys would like that as well.
Thank you so much, Billy. It was really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, and best of luck this school year. Thanks, guys.